The Philadelphia 76ers suffered a frustrating Game 1 loss at the hands of the New York Knicks, in which a glaring weakness in the team was revealed, that being rebounding the basketball. In this video, I want to break down why that was so significant, what the fix is for this Sixers team, and why Nick Nurse does in fact have a plan for it. So to get fully into it, looking at the box score in that matchup, how these two teams faced off, the Knicks out-rebounding the Sixers 55-33 and securing a ridiculous 23 offensive rebounds in the matchup. You simply cannot win basketball games when you're allowing the opponent this amount of additional opportunities. 23 additional offensive attempts because of finding a way for the Sixers not to end possessions. That it is a different story if they are pulling down the defensive rebound, getting ready to focus up and drive down the other direction, and completely separate if the Knicks are getting a second chance at it, getting a third chance at it, getting these extra shot attempts that ultimately buried this Sixers team. So when thinking about how this possibly could work out, how can they fix this? For starters, some of those numbers looking increasingly just poor because of the reason of Joel Embiid. That we know the status of him, the knee injury that he is battling, and you could clearly see in that second half him not being capable or trusting himself to leap up and rebound at the level that this team needs him to. But the reality is the reality. The level that Joel Embiid is at is the level that he's going to be at, so this team has to find ways to combat that. And I think there's one clear answer to why that could be the case. Paul Reed. So we've talked a lot about B-Ball Paul. In fact, he's gotten himself in quite a bit of trouble by his quote leading into the series saying, "I feel like we ain't ducking no smoke. We won in the next matchup. That's the easier team. It's going to be fun. We match up pretty well against them." Well, he talked his talk, and now it is time to allow him to back it up. And I get it is difficult for him to find his way on the floor. We know that he's the backup center for this team, but maybe it is time to try this Twin Towers lineup. Let's roll out Paul Reed and Joel Embiid together. And when thinking about that specifically here, once again, this lineup of Joel Embiid and Paul Reed is the best chance to combat this wide deficit. That the Sixers being out-rebounded 55-33 and allowing 22 offensive rebounds. If that trend continues through the length of this series is as good as over. But there is some optimism for why this could be the case. For starters, Nick Nurse was asked about how both these guys played post-game, and I did want to pull up these quotes here. This being from Sam DiGiovanni of Clutch Points here. He writes, the quote from Nurse is, "I thought Joel battled pretty good down there, trying to get his body on, block people, and people to block out," Nurse said, adding that there are ways to help Embiid on the rebounds that he didn't want to disclose. Reed tallied 5 rebounds and 4 points in 11 minutes, giving the 76ers some much-needed activity down low, but because that activity often led to Philly being more vulnerable on the glass, Nurse is asking Reed to dial it back a bit, saying that he played, quote, almost too aggressively, but that he also, quote, certainly gave a great effort. Nurse said that Reed's Game 1 performance was okay. He was out of position a lot. I thought he went for a lot of block shots that he didn't need to, and he didn't get them, and they ended up sticking him back in because he got off his man a little bit too much. So I think it's fair to assess at this point in time, now that we are this deep in the season, that Nick Nurse isn't the biggest Paul Reed guy. And we've now seen 2 consecutive coaches in which Paul Reed has either worn out his welcome on or isn't quite grasping the concepts that are expected of him. Now, in Paul's defense here, and I do want to shout out Dan Ollinger of the Rights to Ricky Sanchez, did a terrific breakdown on a lot of the rebounding issues. He did another terrific breakdown on the Miami zone in the play-in, both very much worth the watch. When you dive into the reasons for the breakdowns on the boards, Tobias Harris is a far more just guy that you can point to than it is Paul Reed. And a lot of times I felt it was Paul Reed covering up for mistakes for others that led to these. For example, there was a play in which Deuce McBride split the defense up top, which was Tyrese Maxey and I believe Tobias at that point. Paul Reed was forced to step up and attempt to block that floater that Deuce went to throw up, missed it, and it led to an easy Mitchell Robinson just dunk on his second chance opportunity. Now, granted, you want Paul Reed to be the guy blocking out Mitchell Robinson in that situation, but the root of the issue is starting the point of attack defense. So I hesitate to throw that critique fully on Paul Reed, even though you absolutely can look at it that way, and obviously each situation is a little bit different there. But the good news is, I do think Nick Nurse is open to this idea of playing Paul Reed and Joel Embiid together. And why do I think that so confidently? Is he was asked about it directly. Asked about Nick Nurse if he's considering playing a Joel Embiid and Paul Reed lineup to combat the Knicks rebounding, Nurse says, quote, "I would say that's a possibility. Yes. For starters, it is so refreshing to have a coach that is willing to adjust to new situations, that is willing to not stick to the blueprint regardless, in which was the case with Doc Rivers throughout the past 3 years. I do believe that Nick Nurse is going to find a way to just optimize this Sixers team in a way that we did not fully see in Game 1. And I don't think it was all bad in Game 1. Again, the Sixers were in the driver's seat for that matchup for a good portion of the game. We know what happened with Joel Embiid's knee, and I have a full video discussing how things are from there. From all we know to this point, is that he is expected to play to whatever level he is capable of. That there does not seem to be any sort of game plan for the Sixers to shut down Joel Embiid unless there is a doctor decision that dictates that should be the case. To this point, we have no knowledge, and he was a participant at practice today. He is considered officially questionable for tomorrow's game, but I do expect him to be fully out there, and the Sixers team will need everything that he can give us. And when I talk about the Joel Embiid and Paul Reed lineups, this has been a familiar topic among Sixers circles. That dating back to this past offseason, this was a hot topic, and in fact, there seemed to be a more likelihood that it would occur than ultimately proved to be the case this season. To dive into a couple quotes from Nick Nurse dating back to this summer, this being about Paul Reed, he said, quote, "He's a player that I like a lot. He plays very hard and has some very good instincts," said the coach. "Also, he's having a very good summer. I've seen him work very hard from the moment I arrived, and he is trying very hard to improve his shooting." Also, he was asked about playing next to Embiid, to which Nurse replied, quote, "Will he play with Embiid? Sure. I don't think there can be any doubt about that. He's going to be on the court defending and playing hard. In fact, I think that he's going to do many more things than he has done so far. I feel that he is prepared to take a step forward." Now, these quotes have not kind of aged, I guess, as much as I would like to be the case. And particularly speaking here, that when there was the Joel Embiid injury period, it was a little telling that Nick Nurse kept Paul Reed within his role, that he rolled with Mo Bamba as the starting center and kept Paul as that true backup center, the guy that can come in and make an impact. And I get the understanding that Paul is a spark guy. He's an energy guy. He's a guy that can change the game, and there is a positive to having him come off the bench to make an impact in that direction. But also, in this specific matchup, you got to adjust on the fly and you got to change your mind. And as far as not seeing enough of a sample size for the Paul Reed and Joel Embiid minutes together, we've only had a couple situations which it has occurred. To give a little bit of a benefit there, that obviously Joel Embiid missed 43 games this season, so there wasn't quite the opportunity to do it. And it is a very matchup-based type of lineup that there's clearly lineups that you don't want those two both being on the floor against. The biggest concern being the spacing, although I will push back once again and acknowledge that former G League MVP Paul Reed shot 40% from beyond the three-point arc over the length of the season. But the idea being that spacing is not ideal when you do have those two big men. But where the biggest appeal is for me, for starters, just having that activity, that athleticism, and that guy with the will to go up and get a board in Paul. I would consider Paul significantly the best rebounder on this Sixers team, Joel Embiid even included in that conversation. So having that on the defensive end would be a huge asset. And then when you look at the offensive end, so much of this Sixers offense revolves around Joel Embiid getting to his spots in the mid-range and oftentimes three-point shots at this point in time. With that being the case, that Joel being their best rebounder on the floor, there's basically zero chance of the Sixers getting second chance points in their own right. When you add a guy like Paul Reed, you can still run the offense the same way, where Joel Embiid is comfortable getting to his spot, finding that mid-range look that he wants, and if he does miss it, you have a guy like Paul dead set on competing, keeping things alive, and he's good enough to make that the case. Now, we know the goods and bads of Paul Reed. I'm not saying this is going to ultimately change the series, that this is something that is the difference between the Sixers winning and losing. But this is the type of move that could change the outlook of a game. That a couple-minute stint of this changes everything and could ultimately dictate to opening the door to get a win in a way that otherwise would not be the case. So I love that Nick Nurse seems open to this. I love that he's kind of open to just experimenting in a way that we have not seen in past coaches. And ultimately, that is a card that he has in his hand that I think he just must play at this point in time. So the Sixers will be back in action against the Knicks in Game 2. This will be the second straight matchup taking place in New York. They say that the series only starts once the road team does win a victory, so I'm hoping that the series starts tomorrow. We will see what happens to that point. Let me know your guys' comments, your predictions in the comments there. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button to keep the Sixers Digest family growing. Drop a like on the video to let me know you're listening and anything else that you got on your mind. Thank you once again, and talk next time. Peace.